Hi everyone, this is the Zilliqa Weekly Update with Amrit, Kumar. I'm Chase Raz, your host for this. Amrit, hi, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good.
Much better than before when we're barely
Oh,
surviving, when we're saying all sorts of negative things. I told you I like the
more than
one
alive.
I like when people answer and they say, I could complain, but nobody would listen. That's my favorite.
Yeah. So yeah, more than alive now.
More than alive. So today we're here to talk about Valkyrie is sort of the big topic of the week, if you will. So for those who may not be in the know, what is Valkyrie and how is it connected to Zilliqa?
Right. So Valkyrie is an asset management firm, very similar to Grayscale. So people who are familiar with, in the Bitcoin space, you must have heard of GBTC. You must have heard about the premium around GBTC. So it's sometimes very expensive, sometimes much cheaper, and so on. So in a similar vein, Valkyrie is an asset management firm, very similar to Grayscale. So that's a very short summary of what Valkyrie is. Obviously, there's a lot of story behind Valkyrie Zilliqa connection. So Zilliqa Capital, of which I am a co-CIO with my partner Michael, we had invested in Valkyrie as a company. They were raising a Series A recently, so we are invested in this company. And from there, they were basically building trust, right? So they're building Bitcoin Trust. They had Algorand Trust. They had a Dash Trust. And through that investment link, we were able to convince them to have a Zilliqa Trust as well. So that's how Zilliqa and Valkyrie got connected.
Excellent. So they build trusts. Are they only for U.S. accredited investors? Are they for accredited investors through various different locations, or who? Because we're talking trusts, I assume it's all accredited. You know, we need accredited investors. Is it U.S. centric or global?
It is US centric.
Okay, perfect. So my understanding of trust, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is what this will do is it'll enable. And by the way, you had a really good tweet on this. I hope if I'm able to, I'll flash it on screen right here. I believe you put some information on Reddit as well that described this, but it corresponds rather with my understanding that what's happening is people are able to purchase shares or portions, I'm not even sure the correct term there, of this trust, but the trust has the assets under management, and those assets in this case would be a heap load of Zilliqa in some way, a heap load of Zill rather. That's fairly correct?
Yes. So the model. So imagine, for example, you are a very traditional, investor. So let's say you are a bank or you are a asset manager and so on. You would like to get exposed to crypto. It could be BTC, it could be Zills, it could be Ethereum and whatnot. And most of these asset managers or fund managers, they're not dealing with 100K or 500K. They're dealing with a substantial amount of money, right? Which is, it could be tens of millions and so on. Grayscale, for example, last time I checked, it was in tens of billions of, probably if not more, in asset being managed. And so when these investors want to invest in crypto, they obviously want an easier way to access this. They don't want to go to Binance, open an account, and then withdraw these assets and put that on Ledger. That's too much of hassle.
They don't want to be going around YouTube like, how do I move? I was just doing that before this. I'm like, how do I move from this thing to that thing? Like, I had no idea. Right. They don't want to do that.
Exactly. They don't want to do that. It's too much of hassle and it's not worth it, right? So what they want to do is they have an existing system of trading, buying shares and stocks and whatnot, right? And they want to be able to integrate sort of crypto purchases that they make or crypto trading through their existing infrastructure, right? And this is where basically trust comes into play. So trust is considered more like a company which owns, and the only thing that this company owns is a certain asset. It could be BTC, it could be ETH, it could be Zills. And you're basically, as an investor, what you're doing is you're buying shares of this trust. So let's say if you invest, you give, $100 million in this company, into this trust, and you will own a certain portion of that trust. And basically, because the trust's business is only holding asset, so it doesn't do, product development, for example, right? It doesn't do anything else, which means that the entire backing of that trust is the underlying asset. So by owning the stock or by owning the share, you're basically owning a portion of the underlying asset indirectly. And that's why you get exposed to the crypto. Now, the good thing about this is that you're basically using traditional means. So you take your cash, you give that cash to to the asset manager, and the asset manager allocates a certain number of shares to you of that trust. So that's a private sort of investment. You could extend it to sort of OTC trading as well. So, for example, BTC trusts are not, are not exchange traded yet, right? So, if let's say if you had this, trust, and if you had the share,
keyword. I think you're expecting them to be. We're all expecting them to become.
Yes.
Okay. Some ETFs maybe in the future.
Yes. So basically, right now, these trusts, shares of these trusts, are not listed on NASDAQ or not listed on NYSE yet. So what ends up happening is that there are OTC markets for these shares. If, for example, in case of Grayscale, I don't think all of the Grayscale trusts are tradable in OTC markets, but some of them are. For example, BTC, ETH, ETC, and I think probably one more. So there are 3 or 4 trusts that are tradable on OTC markets. So now you could actually come in and buy directly from the OTC as well. So you don't have to go and reach out to Grayscale or Valkyrie to buy. You could go through the OTC. Valkyrie doesn't have OTC yet, but that's the end goal. But right now, you're basically privately investing in trusts.
Well, these are really hot commodities in the investor space. I know that trust and various other forms are being used to put all types of assets into shared and fractionalized ownership in a way that, again, the investor doesn't have to go learn every single way to do. I've seen video games. I kid you not. They're like original video game consoles, stuff like that. That's really rare. There are some companies that specialize in it. So it's a very interesting move, but we'll come back to that in just a moment. Do you have any idea, or do we have any public metrics that we can talk about how much they're looking to, maybe even how many ZIL they're looking to acquire, or how much USD they're looking to, hopefully the projections have steering towards Zilliqa, the Zilliqa Trust, I should say, over, a quarter or a year? Do we have any type of public figures?
Unfortunately, even as an investor, even though I have information about this, as an investor, I can't, they haven't made this number public yet.
Okay.
So in case of Grayscale, you do see numbers public. In case of Valkyrie, these numbers, the AUM is called, asset under management. That number is not publicly revealed by Valkyrie.
Right, or AUM. If anybody sees it out there, or AUM, or assets under management. We don't have that yet. Is this something that's going to be reported? Again, I'm fuzzy on my trust knowledge here. Is that something that's reported publicly, or is that put in a perspective for potential investors?
So if you're an investor, I'm sure you can get access to that information. So if you go through the process of subscription, the private subscription model, but I don't think, trusts are not obliged to reveal this AUM publicly.
Okay.
You don't have to, because they're not publicly traded. So it's basically you're investing as a private investor into that trust. But yeah, once they become public and then become tradable, then of course they are, compliance reasons and all that comes into play, and that becomes that has to be revealed.
So if you're in the US and you're thinking about this, I know one of the questions will be, well, what does it take to become accredited? And to my knowledge, I'm not trying to speak on this as an expert, right? Go talk to your financial advisor is what I'm really going to say. But to my knowledge, when I've looked into it before, there's not a high bar that's set in the United States. It's pretty much you have to have a certain net worth, or some other factors what can get you in that pool as well. But it's basically saying the understanding was, and I've read this interpretation from some experts, is they just want to see that you have a certain amount of money. Therefore, you're going to do your due diligence and can take the loss if you have a loss, and you appreciate the gain if you have the gain. Right? It's just such an American point of view of you can't have this unless you have a certain net worth or something like that. But I say that as a segue to this question. We know there's a certain portion of, and I don't want to be unfair to other people who agree with this, but there's always a certain portion of crypto audiences that everything they feel, rightfully or wrongfully, should be for them. I would ask, what about, ZIL holders and whether they're U.S. or otherwise that aren't accredited investors? What does this do for the overall ecosystem? What does this do for them if they're not the customer that can run out and buy this, buy into this trust?
Well, it helps you with in terms of exposing this asset to a wide variety of institutional clients and investors, right? So it applies in the same way to GBTC today. A lot of what you see around BTC is actually a percentage of certain supply of BTC is actually being held under Grayscale. That gives you an idea of how much institutions are for going for BDC. So that applies to Zilliqa. So it also gives credibility to the project. It also brings potentially new investors that would otherwise would not be interested in, let's say, buying a certain asset. Now they could go through Valkyrie or Grayscale to acquire, a certain trust.
Excellent.
So that's right. It brings credibility, and the good thing about Valkyrie that I mentioned a couple of times already on my tweets and Reddit posts is that it is one of the very few entities and asset managers that have filed for ETF, Bitcoin futures ETF, which is, as we know, it's probably going to get approved before a physical ETF. From what I was reading,
we hope.
from what I was seeing, that the odds were quite high for Valkyrie, from what I saw from a Bloomberg report, which also means that imagine a company like Valkyrie that is able to have the first Bitcoin ETF,
very true,
and on trading on NASDAQ. That exposure to work with a company is invaluable.
Do we have any idea or ability to say how they might be made? Is this a strictly, holding or hodl situation, or do the assets under management, do they get staked? And I mean that not only from the trust point of view, right? Maybe they can answer that question for potential investors, but from the Zilliqa point of view as well. Do you view that as part of TVL in any way, or is it simply wallets or a series of wallets holding?
Yeah, so the very interesting difference between Grayscale and some of the other trusts and Valkyrie is exactly this, which is when you buy BTC or when you buy some of the GBTC or other Grayscale like products, your assets are basically sitting. And what Valkyrie is doing is kind of bringing that traditional finance and DeFi together at some point. So they're bringing it closer. So when you're actually putting in money into Grayscale, into Valkyrie, that money, let's say in terms of in case of ZIL, will be used to acquire ZIL. And once those ZILs are acquired, they will be put to stake. And then that staking, as we all know at Zilliqa, gives you certain returns, and a portion of that return will be shared back with investors. So it's a very similar way of how you are staking, but now the staking is designed for shareholders of that trust. So it brings sort of staking and DeFi to traditional investors who only understands share and stocks.
So sorry for a brief interruption there. I had a technical difficulty on my end, but we do know that these they're being staked, so that does help with the TVL. I think I want to ask this question. I don't know if we know that. Do the ZIL are the ZIL that's earned, is that how do we know the mechanism in which that goes back into the trust, right? If I buy X percent, is all of that ZIL brought back in to the trust? Is a portion of it brought back in? Did you go over any of those terms with Valkyrie when they were setting up?
Yeah, so I mean, anyone who who's interested in getting involved in this, you could, if you reach out and if you go through the process, you'd have the term sheet, you'd have the agreements that you'll have to the PPM, that's called private placement memorandum, the PPM that most private investors get. You have all the details there. But basically, yes, there is whatever money comes from staking, there's a certain management fee that gets taken out from that, because there's a company still has to maintain the trust and management and law fees and whatnot. So there's a certain fee that goes to Valkyrie for maintenance, and the remaining comes back to you.
I was just checking because it's it's important to me that using an investment vehicle like this, that people are still able to partake in both the speculative investment, but also in the actual percentage returns and staking to some degree. You mentioned, I think we should head to a conclusion here, but I want to make sure that we give some credit here. I believe you mentioned on social media that it was Michael Kahn that had made the initial Valkyrie introduction. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Michael and Leah, she's a good friend now. Leah, she's the CEO of Valkyrie. So Michael and Leah, I think they knew each other for a while. They, I think, probably worked together at some point. So the intro obviously came from Michael, and from there, both me and Michael, we invested into Valkyrie through Zilliqa Capital. So this is where the connection definitely came from Michael.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael. I'm working with you right there in Zilliqa Capital, making some great things happen. I'm really glad to hear it. Amrit, any last words on this topic? Anything else that I failed to ask that you think people really ought to know about Valkyrie before we wrap up?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that people always say that look, it's only for institutions, and the term institution has a very wide meaning. It obviously includes traditional investment banks, hedge funds, and whatnot, but it also includes small and medium enterprise owners. For example, I was as an investor when I was doing my own due diligence into Valkyrie, I realized that there were investors who were dentists, who were car dealers, and those sort of people who had hard time understanding the crypto world, but they understood how to invest in shares. They understood how to get exposed to shares, and through crypto, through a trust like Valkyrie, they could have that. So it's also about being able to understand that it's not just about banks and hedge funds and asset managers with $100 billion in management, but it's also for normal business owners who can, and in many cases, have the right eligibility to qualify to be a private investor in some of those trusts.
Well, thanks for that point. And thanks for concluding on that, because there are, I mean, we talk about this in the crypto space very frequently, how much research, how much due diligence, how much investment and time it takes. We joke that some people are here full time when they don't work in the crypto space. And, I'm pretty close to one of those. And it's interesting to think, if you have a small business owner who says, I simply cannot take this time, but I want to diversify and I want to get exposure to this asset. That is a really good point and something very strong and powerful for people to consider, because it gives an option where there may not be one, simply because of the learning curve right now. And I know a couple of projects in the Zilliqa space are working on that, and I wish them all the success, but that's a very, very valid point. So thank you, Amrit, today for joining. Since I co-opted your last word, any final last words for this this edition?
I could go on as well, but I do feel that there's also, again, I'm not a US resident, and US tax implications are very wide and a bit twisted. But what I know is that crypto tax reporting is complicated, but also trust investment through trusts actually simplifies a lot of that tax reporting as well. So that's also one extra benefit that some of the enterprises, SMEs who would like to get exposed to crypto through trusts, they get that benefit of tax reporting.
100% agree. Thank you so much, Amrit. Until next time.
See you.